there I was, standing in the middle of nowhere, and I could see myself down in my hospital bed, dying in this atrophied, broken, shrunken body in my green hospital gown. And at the same time, I could see myself standing in the middle of nowhere whole. And I thought to myself, what? How can this be? This is inexplicable for me. And in that moment, I saw and became part of this gigantic web made of twinkling lights. And I realized then that God uses light to create, heal, and transform us. And that I was one little spark, one little quirk of light in this magnificent web that was this beautiful tapestry that seemed to hang on the ceiling of the universe and extend into infinity. And I was part of this web. And when I was part of that web, I realized that if I hurt myself, I hurt everything connected to me. But if I love, the light would spread.
Today, we have the incredible opportunity to delve into the life-altering experience of Rob Gentile, who encountered the extraordinary not once, but twice through his near-death experiences. His first NDE was a profound turning point, radically transforming his previous beliefs. And his second encounter was equally profound because he met the divine. He encountered God. Listeners constantly express how Rob's story has deeply touched and transformed their heart. And today we're going to delve deep into these life altering experiences and explore his newly gained spiritual insight. So, Rob, welcome. I am so excited to talk to you today.
Lori, thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Great. Well, why don't we start with you sharing with the audience what your life was like before this first near-death experience?
Sure. I was raised in a small steel mill town in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My parents were Italian immigrants, and my father worked in the steel mill as my grandfather did. And much like my father, I continue to be in the steel business today. But what had happened to me, Lori, was at age 56 years old. Curiously, I had gone back I live in North Carolina now. I had gone back to Pennsylvania to have some bone spurs removed from my neck because I was suffering through some nerve pain. And these bone spurs were from sports injuries I had when I was a kid. So there's a very famous doctor in Pittsburgh, Korean doctor, that goes in through the front and cuts a small hole in the neck, instead of cutting the back of your neck open, and then you fuse your discs and you're in pain the rest of your life. So I go to Pittsburgh. Everybody from all over the world goes there to get this surgery done. It's very simple. You're in the hospital one night. He goes in, he cuts you, moves your esophagus, and drills out these bone spurs. So I had that done. Everything went well. And then I got back to North Carolina, and 3 nights later, now in retrospect, we know what happened. I threw a blood clot and it went right into my widowmaker. So at around 11 p.m. or so at night, I began screaming in pain, didn't know what was going on. My wife and I have one child, my daughter Maria, who's special needs. She can't walk, talk, or feed herself. She has a seizure disorder. My wife thought that it was maybe Maria screaming, and she ran down the hall. Maria was sleeping and came back into the bedroom and realized that it was me screaming and flopping around in the bed. So she turns on the light, and I tell her, Melanie, I have never felt a pain like this before in my life. And it was the last thing that I said. I passed out from the pain and I was unconscious. So my wife dials 911. Thankfully, the ambulance got there quickly, and the hospital was only like 3 miles away from our house. So I get wheeled into the hospital. The EMT knows that I'm having a massive heart attack. He just didn't know how bad it was. So we get into the ER, and the nurse and the doctor on call give me some kind of a medicine, probably blood thinners, who knows, to stabilize me. So they put me in a room with the nurse, And the nurse tells my wife, look, the cardiologist on call isn't in the hospital. He's been, he's been called, he's on his way, but your husband is stable. He should be fine. The minute she said that, my wife said it was like a moment from the movie The Exorcist. I had sprung forward on the gurney, like someone had grabbed me by my shirt and just pulled me forward with great force. From the waist up, I just sprang forward. My eyes popped wide open, and I screamed out the name Frosty. When I screamed out the name Frosty, I collapsed backward on the gurney, and I flatlined. Code blue rang out on the hospital floor, and in rushed a doctor who's now a very good friend of mine, Dr. Patel. And my wife turns to Dr. Patel and says, we have a special needs child and she's not going to make it without him. And I cannot do this alone. You have to save my husband. Talk about pressure. So Dr. Patel and her team take my wife out of the room and begin to work on me. 5 minutes go by. She can't get me to resuscitate. My heart is still flatlined. 10 minutes go by. I'm not responding. 15 minutes go by. Still nothing. My organs are shutting down. She tries to stick epinephrine into my heart with the long needle. 4 times she stuck epinephrine in my heart, broke one of my ribs, shocks. I mean, just the whole thing. Finally, the cardiologist arrives. He does an emergency cath through my thigh. He finds the blockage in my widowmaker, inserts 2 stents, but it's too late. I'm in cardiogenic shock, respiratory failure. 20 minutes go by. Another doctor arrives on the scene, Dr. Carson. He intubates me. I'm on the vent where I would lay in a 4-day coma. So that's how my experience began. I was raised Catholic, being a Catholic Italian and being raised in Pittsburgh. And my oldest brother, my wife calls my oldest brother, he drives down from Pittsburgh, calls the local parish priest. The parish priest comes in, anoints me with oil and gives me my last rites. In the Catholic faith, you only get that one time. It's called extreme unction. So I was given my last rites and I was in that coma for 4 days. And during that period, they had several neurologists come in to see if I were brain dead. I don't know how they test for that or what they do. But on the 4th day, my doctor said, look, we can't wait any longer. He's probably a vegetable. We're going to pull the tubes out and see what we've got. So obviously, I started choking and here I am. But what's interesting about this, Lori, is that my wife was the first one to come in to the recovery room when I came out of coma. And she walks in the room and she said, I was talking in this childlike, high-pitched voice. And I said, Melanie, you have to believe me. It was Frosty. It was Frosty. He came to me. And she said, oh my God, Rob, that makes total sense. And I said, what are you talking about? And she said, right before you flatlined, you sprang forward on the gurney and you shouted out Frosty's name before you collapsed. So to give you a little bit of the backstory, Frosty was my brother-in-law, same age as me. I was 56 years old the night that I died. And Frosty lives about 35 miles south of here. At the time, he was going through a divorce and living with his parents in the upstairs bedroom. And he had his own business. He was a land surveyor. He had one daughter in college, and it was just a very stressful time. Frosty had struggled with drugs years prior, but he was clean for many years. And he just thought that one night, around the holidays, he'd go out and blow off some steam. And unfortunately, he got a hold of a street drug that just drove him mad for like 40 minutes. And he came home that night and he took his own life. So my mother-in-law had called me like 5:30 in the morning, and she asked me to come to the house and go upstairs in the bedroom to see if I could find a journal or a note or something that would give them a clue as to why Frosty had done that. And I have to tell you, it took everything that I had. I had gone up into that room 7 times and picked through a rather gruesome scene. And then I finally found a journal that I had given to the family. But what was interesting about that is that my wife, she said to me, she said, tell me exactly what Frosty said to you. And I said, Frosty said to me, I made a big mess of things and you have to go back and help clean things up. But tell my family I'm in a good place. And, Lori, that was the first time that I had this huge paradigm shift in my belief system. Being raised Catholic, and I know they've changed the rules now, that being raised Catholic, taking one's life was called a mortal sin, which means you were condemned to hell. There was, straight down, there was no coming back. But yet here Frosty was telling me that he was in a good place. And as I contemplated that, I realized for the first time in my life that these were man-made rules and they were not the tenets of a loving God who would not condemn anyone in that state of mind or otherwise. So that was one of the first big shifts in my belief system. And the other thing that happened, which was really interesting, is that on the second day coming out of my coma, this beautiful little Indian woman came to my bed, and my arms were paralyzed for the first couple of days when I came out of coma. And she pulls up a chair and she sits down and she introduces herself. And she said, I just want you to know that I'm Dr. Patel. I was the doctor that came in and tried to resuscitate you. And she got very emotional, began to cry. And she said, she was telling me what she did to me and how many times she almost lost me. And then it got very personal, which I found kind of curious. And she began to tell me about her father. And she said, Rob, my father and I were very close. He helped me through medical school. We could almost read each other's thoughts. And the only thing that I was living for or he was living for, was to see my first child. And she said, I'm Hindu and I have a very strong spiritual belief system. I was raised that way. She said, but 6 months before my son was born, my father died of an aneurysm suddenly. And she said, since that time, I've lost kind of like my spirituality. I've been bitter about that, but seeing you here alive gives me hope. And it maybe, just maybe, there really is something else out there. And in that moment, it struck me. There was another male spirit that had entered the room. And as Dr. Patel was working on me, I kept on hearing over and over again, keep working on him. You can save him. Don't give up. Keep working on him. You can save him. Don't give up. And the puzzle kind of like unscrambled in my mind. And I realized it was Dr. Patel's father speaking to her through me, because something compelled her not to give up. When somebody flatlines, I was dead for more than 20 minutes. She should have called it like in the first 5 minutes, but she continued to work on me. It's kind of curious, I did not tell her in that moment because I would have, thought I was crazy. It wasn't until a year later that I came back and interviewed her and the other doctors for my book that I told Dr. Patel. And to this day, we're very good friends. And on his birthday, we always chat. And it changed her belief system too, because for the first time, she realized that her father is still with her. He's always with her, encouraging her to, continue to be a good doctor. And he was by her side that night when she was trying to save me. So that's how my experience began.
I love this story for so many reasons. One of the things that I'm super passionate about is helping people to understand that when they lose a loved one, that their loved one is not gone. They are still with them. They hear them. They know what they're going through. And stories like this confirm that belief for me and for the people watching. So I'm curious. I have a couple of different questions I want to ask about this first NDE. The
Sure.
first question I want to ask you is, you encountered Frosty. Do you have a memory of how Frosty looked? Because if you think about how he exited, it was a horrific exit. He took his own life, and you may expect to see something not wonderful, but usually when people encounter somebody on the other side, they look a certain way.
Mm.
So do you have a memory of how he looked to you?
There was one picture of Frosty it was actually after his daughter was born, and one of the happiest moments of his life. And he just had this beautiful glow about him. And that's how I remember Frosty in that moment. Now, Dr. Patel's father was strictly a voice just coming through, but in spirit, I knew when she came to me and when she was telling me about, the experience of trying to save me, I put that all together in that moment. And I knew it was her father, encouraging her not to give up on me. So it was two completely different experiences,
Yeah.
but both in spirit, because we have to realize, we're spiritual beings first having this experience. So when someone says to me, well, geez, I find that odd. Why would you find that odd when, this is just a shell that we have here that we're, kind of occupying while we learn our lessons. So we have to always remember that things happen in spirit first before they happen here in the
Yeah.
physical. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. So you have these very specific Catholic doctrines that you're prescribing to, and one of them being this experience that somebody who commits suicide would no longer be admitted into heaven.
Right.
And now you meet somebody who you would not expect to be in a good place telling you, seeing him with your own eyes, not just a faith that this is the way it is, but an experience that this is the way it is. So
Right.
how did that change some of the religious doctrine that you had bought into around the ideas of heaven and hell? I'm curious about that.
And I learned more of those lessons in my second NDE
Okay, so we
where
can
the
pause that and come back to it if you want.
no, I mean, but to me, what I learned about this is that God is pure love and light, and that God does not condemn. God understands our weaknesses. God understands that we're here to learn things. Now, I'm not saying that, and this is where there's a slippery slope here. I'm not saying that people shouldn't be responsible for their own actions, because they should. But my definition or my personal opinion of a hell is that it's just this distance further away from God's love and light until you learn your lessons, and then you get pulled back in as you learn these lessons. So I don't think that there's some fiery hell that we're condemned to because we make a mistake in our life. I think that God is all loving and forgiving, but it's just a matter of how close we are to that love and light of the Creator. So how the rest of that works, who knows? But that's just, my personal experience from what I learned through that NDE.
Well, I think that that's really helpful that you're sharing that, because I think that sometimes people have these, they almost put themselves in their own torture because of the beliefs
Sure.
through religion that they think now somebody that they loved is not in a good place, and they worry about it and it affects their lives in, in very negative ways. And
Sure.
hearing a story like this, hearing somebody who had an actual experience and having them interpret what they feel like things are, I think
Yeah.
can help the people that are listening. So thank you for sharing that. I
Well,
appreciate it.
sure. Yeah.
Okay, so you have this second near-death experience. So do you want to talk about that one?
Sure. So as you can imagine, Dr. Patel was the one to give me the bad news that my heart was completely destroyed in that heart attack, laying in that coma for 4 days. So in my book, I call this chapter is Seeking a New Heart. So I had to get a heart transplant to survive. It was the only way to survive. So I died that night in January, and I went to every heart transplant center that I could go to. There's two very, very good ones here in North Carolina. Both of them told me that, hey, hearts are in short supply. The waiting list is very, very long. You're way down on it. So, not exactly sure what we can do for you. We can offer you this thing called the LVAD. I researched the LVAD and I categorically denied any opportunity to get the LVAD, which is this device where they literally drill a hole in your heart and they put a motor in there and it just spins your blood and tries to keep you alive until a donor heart arrives. But less than 30% of people that get the LVAD ever survive until a heart comes. So what they did for me is that first thing, they fitted me in this defibrillator vest. So every time my heart would fail, which was often, it looked like a policeman's vest, and I had a battery pack over my left shoulder, and it would shock my heart back. And then as my heart continued to weaken and time went on, they put a port in my chest, dripping this medicine called milrinone. My doctor said it's like STP for the heart. It makes it pump, but it wears it out very quickly. So I had another battery pack on my other shoulder. I'm walking around like this cyborg creature, trying to stay alive. So 3 months go by. I still can't get a heart. And I called my boss. I worked for a privately held company in Chicago, and I told him that, I was just going to resign and more than likely, die naturally because I couldn't get a heart transplant. And lo and behold, my employer is a philanthropist, and he was able to help me get admitted to the University of Chicago Medicine to start my pre-transplant evaluation. So I was admitted to the University of Chicago Medicine on April 20th, which ironically is the day that my father passed away when I was 5 years old. So it was his way of letting me know he was still with me on this journey. I got admitted to the University of Chicago, and the doctor looked at me, and never forget Dr. Uriel, which by the way is an archangel. So Dr. Uriel looks at me and says, Rob, I have no idea how you're even walking around, but we'll see what we can do to help you. And lo and behold, Dr. Juvenandan, another avatar, who's a world famous heart surgeon. He's transplanted over 1,500 people, including his own wife. He had been working on an experimental heart pump for about 15 years. So he came to me and he said, Rob, the only way that you're going to survive is if we try this heart pump on you. And I said, oh, that's really cool, Doc. How does this thing work? And he said, well, we're going to slit a hole in your chest, and we're going to fish this little balloon pump down through your aorta, and out your left side is going to, this titanium disc behind your rib cage, and these wires are going to come out. It's going to connect to this pump about the size of a lunchbox, and you could strap it on your shoulder and walk around the hospital, and it'll pump your heart until a donor heart arrives. And I said, wow, that's really cool, Doc. I said, how many people have had this thing? And he said, well, that's just it. He said, you would be our first human trial. We've only experimented on cows and pigs. But he said, but
You're like, how many cows and pigs survived?
But he said, well, you really don't have an option because, you're getting weaker every day. So I signed the paperwork, and they installed this thing in me called the New Pulse, which is now being used all over the country as a bridge to heart transplant. But even with that, Lori, my heart was so weak about time that I got there. And laying in the bed, almost 6 months have gone by now. And I don't want to spoil this for the reader, but they had found something else in me that precluded me from getting a heart. So there are certain medical conditions like cancer, certain things that preclude you from getting a heart because you have to be on immune suppressants the rest of your life. And in theory, these immune suppressants will just let the immune system run wild, and they didn't want to waste the heart.
Yeah.
So that's when it happened. I was there for almost 6 months, and I'm about 174 pounds. I had wizened down to a skeleton. I was about 132 pounds. I had gotten pneumonia. They had to impale me with a drainage tube in my right lung. I couldn't get out of the bed. And my transplant team came in that night and said, hey, Rob, we have to take you off the transplant list. So I never forget, I was, and in the book, I call this the darkness. So I was on the 8th floor of the University of Chicago Medicine facing Lake Michigan. And this is a real lesson in negative thinking, I have to tell you, because when they told me that, I was alone in my room that night, and this storm whipped up off the lake, a storm like I'd never seen before. I mean, sheets of rain pounding against the window, lightning like I had never seen. There I was by myself, and all this negative thinking started to kick in that, you have no value, you've wasted your life, you never found your purpose, you prayed for your daughter to die. All of these horrible things, mistakes that I had made in the past, I was drawing all this stuff into me like a magnet. And before you know it, I had I guess, an anxiety attack. My chest was just pounding. I started sweating. And lo and behold, my heart went into tachycardia, which is this real rapid heartbeat. And I could hear the alarm going off on the bed. And in that moment, I just let go. And I said, do with me what you will. And in that moment, I was taken up into a place that I call the ethereal. And I guess the best way to describe this place is it's like the veil was pulled back for, a millisecond or however long it lasted to just give me a glimpse of the other side. And curiously, I found myself standing in the middle of nowhere. And the best way to explain this is it's kind of like when you're on an airplane and you're looking out the window on a clear, beautiful day, and all you see is blue. You see everything, but you're really looking at nothing. And that's how it was initially. There I was, standing in the middle of nowhere, and I could see myself down in my hospital bed, dying in this atrophied, broken, shrunken body in my green hospital gown. And at the same time, I could see myself standing in the middle of nowhere whole. And I thought to myself, how can this be? This is inexplicable. And then I realized that I was in a different place, and I felt this sadness come over me because there were no angels. I didn't hear any music. My parents who had gone before me didn't come to greet me. I was just standing in the middle of nowhere. I didn't see God as I perceive God. But then, as clearly as I'm speaking to you, it was almost as if I felt like I was connected to the vast wisdom of the universe, all of it without words. The five senses had no functionality in this place. In other words, I couldn't hear, smell, taste, or touch anything. But yet communication was kind of like telepathic and synchronistic. If I wanted to know the answer to any question, all I had to do was think about it. And then that's when it happened. God expressed as concepts that I wholly understood in the moment. As clearly as I'm speaking to you, these concepts began to kind of like become absorbed into my being. Concepts like, I am omnipotent. This is the power behind all things. This is the divine source. This is your real identity. And, I have to tell you that I realized in that place that I was not my body, my race, or my religion. And I also realized that, when my father died, I had lost my identity, and I had struggled with that well into adulthood. But then I realized that my identity didn't come from my father or my mother, that I came through my parents, but not from them. This is where I was from. I'm from this beautiful place of love and light, this place where the divine source resides, which is where we all come from. And in that moment, I saw and became part of this gigantic web made of twinkling lights. And the best way to describe this web is we know what a neuron looks like from science class. It has this nucleus and then has dendrites and tentacles, and they all connect. And this web was woven together, and inside each nucleus was this spark or quark of light. And these quarks of light, I was shown that quarks are the smallest building blocks of matter. And these quarks, they are made of light, and they combine to create infinite possibilities in the universe. They could become a tree, a person, a dog, or a planet. And I realized then that God uses light to create, heal, and transform us. And that I was one little spark, one little quirk of light in this magnificent web that was this beautiful tapestry that seemed to hang on the ceiling of the universe and extend into infinity. And I was part of this web. And when I was part of that web, I realized that if I hurt myself, I hurt everything connected to me. But if I love, the light would spread. And it was in that moment that one of the most extraordinary experiences that I've ever had happened to me. You know, my daughter Maria, she's going to be 28. When I died, she was 20, and we've never had a conversation. And out of that web, here comes Maria. She came out of that web, and she was standing there in front of me, perfect and whole. And in that unspoken language of the ethereal, I had a conversation with her for the first time. And I asked her, I said, Maria, I said, I've never heard you say my name. I don't know anything about your personality. I said, your mother and I have taken you everywhere to find a cure to help ease your suffering. I said, just tell me what it is that we can do for you. And she said 3 words that transformed my life. She said, just love me. And when she said, just love me, I cried out into that infinite space that I never wanted to leave here. And that's when I found myself back in my hospital bed, and I could hear the alarm going off in my bed, and the nurse rushed in, and she was putting something in my IV bag to stabilize my heart. And that was my experience, my second near-death experience.
I can see the tears in your eyes as you told that last part about Maria. We talked about this before, that it's so difficult.
Yeah.
And when I told the audience before we started this interview, how many people have said that this story has deeply resonated and touched their hearts, it's because I think of this part. And I want to share with you, first of all, thank you so much. I'm so grateful that you've chosen to share a story like this with the world, because there are so many parts that I think the people watching, they're not just going to be inspired by the story, but we're going to talk in a little bit about some of these ideas that you've been able to integrate into your life that has greatly and profoundly changed you forever. So
Yeah.
while you were sharing your story, I want to tell you that I got goosebumps 3 times. Once when you said that you were connected to the vastness of the universe. I don't know why that made me get total goosebumps. You just need to ease your suffering and just love me. And when you said, if I love, light will spread.
Yeah.
Those are such huge, huge messages. I have so many questions about this NDE because you experienced a lot. So I think one of the first questions I have for you is the web. The web is such a unique part of your NDE. I've only heard maybe 2 other people have an experience like this where they could see a web where how the connections were shown to them with the light.
Yeah.
Were you able to see, through seeing this web, were you able to understand your soulmate connections? And what I mean by soulmates is these people that changed your life, like Dr. Patel, your boss at work who helped you to connect to get this heart transplant eventually. Were you able to see those interconnections with those soulmates and how they were part of your experience?
Not not those people specifically. Instead, what I saw, Lori, was all of us, our entire humanity, the whole human race, is that we're all connected. We're all one. We just manifest differently, but we're all made of the same stuff. You know, at our very essence, when all of this wardrobe comes off, including our skin color, we will finally understand that our very essence is made of light. That's what the Creator uses. It's the same recipe. These quarks are the same principle throughout the universe. They create both animate and inanimate matter. It's the same stuff. We're all made of the same stuff. So this is, part of when I do keynote speeches, this is why I tell people you have to understand that until we realize that we're all connected and we're all one, we'll never be at peace with ourselves and we'll never find peace in the world, because there's no difference except our belief systems. And we have to respect everybody's belief systems, because what I found, because I experienced everyone's belief system. I had all of these marvelous people, who took care of me on my journey. I had Christians and Jews and Muslims and Sikhs and all these different people. So in my book, there's a chapter entitled All One. And what I learned from this is that in its purest form, everybody's belief system has the same thread woven through all of it, and it's love. Love is at the core of everyone's belief system in its purest form. Of course, we see some belief systems that, have become radicalized and become violent and things like that. But that isn't what those belief systems are in their purest form. The other thing that I realized being part of that web is that, and this is really key to one of the life lessons that transformed me, God both expresses and experiences life through us. That's why we're here. And that's why it's so important to find our purpose. I had to die to figure it out. I don't wish that on anyone, but that's what it's all about. We all come here with a gift, a talent, something that needs expressed. It could be as simple as, I'm the best. I'm the best car mechanic. I'm the best teacher. I'm the best doctor. I'm the best, whatever it is. But it's radically important for us to find out what our purpose is and express it. Because when we don't, this is how we get drugged into the darkness. The vicissitudes of life take over, whether it's an addiction of alcohol or drugs or whatever that is, whatever these vicissitudes of life, these challenges bring to us. We have to understand that adversity is an opportunity to grow closer to the Creator, because these are the things that push us into the corner. They call us out and they make us peel back that onion to find out what we're really made of. And when we do that, and we realize that we come from this place of love and light, that we're all part of, one little speck of this light from God, then these things shouldn't scare us. What they allow us to do, what adversity allows us to do, is find out who our real authentic self is. And when we get there, we're really going to love that person, because it's tied to this spiritual web. I think that web, I've come to understand that web that I saw is nothing more than the struggle between light and dark that humanity has dealt with from the beginning of time. And what happens in this spiritual web is but a reflection of what's going on here in the temporal world. And it's a mirror, it's a reflection of itself. So those are some of the lessons, part of the lessons that the most profound ones that transformed my life from this experience. I talk about these things in great detail in the book. We certainly don't have time to go into all this now, but that's something that I just wanted to get out there, because that's what helped transform my life personally.
Well, that's really helpful. So one of the things I heard you say is that part of our purpose and something that makes our life profoundly better is discovering what our soul's individual purpose is.
Yes.
So for you and I, we've both been on the other side, and it's been expressed to us, and we know what our soul's purpose is. That's great for us. And most people watching are not going to have one of those experiences or have a near-death experience. I'm going to link a video that I did called Uncover Your Soul's Purpose, where it talks a little bit about some of the things that you can do. But Rob, what would you tell the people watching that they could begin to use to help figure out what their own soul's purpose is without having a near-death experience?
Oh, that's simple. Everybody knows what they're passionate about. Everyone knows what they really want to become or what they really want to do. Again, we just cover it all up with all this junk along the way, that we call life. But everyone knows what they're excited about. I would encourage everyone, and I'm not saying, quit your job and run out there and decide to become a chef. These things have to be planned, and these things have to be done with some intelligence, right? I can't quit my job. I have a special needs child. I'd love to get on the road and talk about my book and what I learned and all of these things every day, but it's not practical. However, this outlet of being interviewed by people like you, writing my book, took me 3 years to write my book. I did it from 4:30 in the morning to 7:30 in the morning before I went to work. That's why it took me 3 years. And also because I prayed every morning to let the spirit speak through me. So I knew that things were authentic. And plus, I've journaled for most of my life. So that helped. But everyone knows what it is that makes them happy and what resonates with them. And like I said, even though sometimes we're trapped in a job or we're whatever our circumstances are, and we can't do those things full time, we can begin to chip away at them, and everybody can find a little bit of time to work on that passion and to work on that thing. And I'll tell you how I do it. I call this the fourth watch. There's this magical hour that takes place before the sun comes up. And I know a lot of people aren't early risers, but that's when I meditate. I strongly encourage people to find a space to meditate. It doesn't have to be, that early in the morning. It could be late in the evening, but I find in the morning when my mind is empty and before I start my day to let that spiritual, intuition come through. And when I do that and have that moment, sometimes it can only be 10 minutes, but there's always something that comes through that helps me get through the day and kind of helps direct me. So you could do that. That's very important. The other thing that I do, and I do it all the time when I'm at work, take a walk outside and connect with nature. It's a powerful thing, particularly in the springtime. This is just an incredible time of the year, because I just love to see all of this, new birth coming out of the trees and the flowers. And it's just a miracle in itself to see the magnificence of the creator and the intelligence of the design and all of nature. Just a marvelous thing. So these are very simple things that we can do to start to open our mind and open our spirit and our hearts instead of watching television or, staying on Instagram. Those things do nothing but distract us. So
No, that's really helpful. So I'm going to ask you, what time specifically do you consider that early morning hour that you feel like there's that magical connection for you in your time zone? What time is that for you?
so that's between 4:30 and 5:30 in the morning.
Okay. So
So
people
when
are
I
watching
wrote,
can have an idea if they want to try and integrate this.
yeah. So when I wrote my book, I went into this routine, and every morning I would get up at 4:30, grab my cup of coffee, go into that room and say a little prayer and just sit there with my pad. And sometimes nothing would come through. And sometimes I would kind of like prompt, artists call it the muse, I call it spirit. It doesn't matter, it's the same. And sometimes you have to just, start that pen, even if you start scribbling. I really encourage journaling. What really helped me in my book, uh, I realized that Maria got sick at 18 months, and I began journaling at 18 months, and I continued that all through my heart transplant and all of my experiences. And journaling really helps because you capture what's going on at the moment, because you can no way can you remember these things and go back in such great detail the mind will always trick you. So, but journaling and capturing it in that moment is an incredible thing. And I use this metaphor of the fourth watch because, as a Christian in the Bible, the fourth watch is when the disciples were in the boat, and for all night they're fighting the storm, and the boat's starting to sink, and that's when Christ came to them and stuck out his hand and said, Peter, just walk on the water, don't be afraid, and took his hand. And so that, to me, that was just a beautiful moment in that Bible story. But that's when it happened, and that's kind of like a metaphor for our life, because it's just when we're about to give up, that light, the dawn starts, right? So that's my personal way to connect with spirit and keep this transformation alive and going in my life.
I love that because it's something that people can practically do. They can meditate, they can set aside time to try and kind of capture their thoughts, they can talk to their spirit team, they can be in nature, and they can journal. So these are really practical tips for everybody. I want to go back to the near-death experience and to the part where you talked about you were connected into the knowledge, the infinite knowledge of the universe, and there wasn't any question that you couldn't ask that wasn't answered in that place. Now, I know that sometimes when we're on the other side, we're not allowed to bring everything back, but were there some insights of questions that you asked that you received answers for that have really stuck with you as, wow, this was extraordinary that I received this information?
Yes, and it wasn't, it wasn't any specific questions. It was just kind of like, for me, my experience was all of a sudden, I think the best way to describe this is it was almost as if the grains of my being were made of sand and somebody picked me up and threw me and scattered me across the universe. It's almost like I just opened up into this gigantic being and was everywhere at once. And when that happened, and that's when I became part of that web and connected to everything. And that's where I was shown that quarks are the smallest building blocks of matter, the foundation of everything, and that God uses light to create, heal, and transform us. That's where those were the things that were coming to me. There's a lot more in the book, Lori, about these things, but showing that we don't come from our parents, we come through them, and that God is our real identity, how God uses light, and we're all part of that light, one little speck of the Creator's light, how the divine expresses through us and experiences life through us, how we're all connected, and that how love spreads that light. See, that's how we light up the world. And that's when I spoke to the hospital here in North Carolina, Caramont Hospital, had me come in, and I honored the three doctors that saved my life that night. And I did a keynote speech and honored Dr. Patel, Dr. Bajwa, and Dr. Carson. And I talked about that. And this is somewhere I'm going to take a left-hand turn because I didn't talk about this earlier. But when I was in that web, there were some parts of the web that were brighter than others. And I remember when I was there thinking, what are these dark parts of the web? Is that evil? What is it? It kind of frightened me. And I had kind of like an aha moment when I was writing my book, and it came to me that those dark parts of the web were places where human beings were not allowing this love and light of God to express here in the temporal world. And that these doctors that helped save my life were some of the brightest lights in that web, because that's how, when we express the gifts that we come here to express, our purpose, our passion, that's when our light really gets bright. And then that emboldens other people to find out what their passion is, and for them to spread their light. And then that's how this whole web lights up. That's how we light up the world. So those are some of the big things that, I found through just allowing these thoughts to come in and express themselves through me without even asking any questions. It was just kind of like, so no, I didn't ask any detailed question like, why can't I heal Maria? Or what's the magic formula so I can give it to the doctor? I would have liked to have asked that, but anyway.
I bet you would have. So, how is Maria doing, and how is your relationship different with her after you got to experience her spirit and have that conversation with her?
Well, I realized that, and I mentioned part of this, and we were talking about the darkness. There have been many times that I had prayed for Maria to be released from this physical realm, and those are heavy things to carry around, heavy burdens to carry around. But now even though she still suffers, and suffering is one of those things that I don't think anybody has an answer for other than understanding that this life is very, very temporary and that we're perfect and whole in spirit. But for me, it changed my whole perception of Maria. I see her now as teacher, as lover, as friend, and someone who helped me discover, my own purpose and realize that everyone has value, and that even though she presents as someone who can't communicate verbally, she's a very evolved spirit, and we have an incredible relationship. And we communicate that way. We communicate through spirit, through our eyes. When I meditate, sometimes I find myself in her bedroom while I'm sitting in the living room in my chair. So there's a connection now that's been developed between Maria and I that it transcends this temporal physical world. And it taught me that we have to be very careful when we see somebody like Maria. Their spirit knows exactly what's going on, and we have to be careful of how we treat them, because they are part of this web. They're part of God's creation, and we have to make sure that we respect them and we honor them like we do, everyone else.
So, do you think, from your perspective and your experiences, that the condition that Maria has and suffers from was something that happened to her? Or do you think it was something that she knew she was choosing coming in to have this incarnation for whatever reason that we might not be able to understand?
That's a great question, Lori. I haven't figured that out yet. That wasn't part of my experience, and I know that there are others that have had near-death experiences that understand that sometimes we choose that path before we come here.
Right?
Um, to me, something did happen to Maria along the way that I think triggered what's going on with her, which is very complicated. She has something called Rett syndrome, RETT syndrome. It only happens to girls, and there's only like 367,000 girls on the planet that have it, and they all present the same way that Maria does. It has something to do with proteins in the brain not being produced so the synapses can grow. So I don't, I'm still very much out on, and I pray about that, because I'd like to have that answer about, do we really choose this path before we come here? Um, not sure.
Okay, fair enough. So you've talked about your book a little bit. Will you tell us the name of it, where we can find it, and where people can connect with you?
Sure, through my website, there's a contact page, and they can email me through my contact page, and I work very hard to answer everyone that that emails me.
Oh my
So
gosh, that could be a full-time job in and of itself.
right. But it's a beautiful thing, because this has been one of the most gratifying parts of my experience and of writing the book. That I've get emails from people all over the world saying, Rob, my daughter was, considering doing some things with her life that um, she shouldn't have, and I gave her your book, and it changed the trajectory of her life. And I mean, things like that are just, there's just no way to put a kind of like a financial reward on that, because you certainly don't make any money writing a book. But
No, you don't. It's just such a misnomer, right?
yeah, it is a misnomer.
It takes so much energy, like you said, just not just the 3 years to write it, but then it probably took you an equal amount of time to have it edited. It's crazy what people put into a book. It's not a simple thing.
Yes, yes. COVID changed that. COVID changed everything. So now so many brick and mortar stores have closed, and
Yeah.
those that survive, they have to, unless you're an athlete or a movie star or, something like that. Those
J.K.
are the ones,
Rowling's.
yeah, good luck. Your book's going to be put on the back shelf and collect dust. So they can't afford to have you in there. It's
Right,
just,
but what I will say about that is the self-publishing changed everything, and
oh yeah,
so your book might not be a mainstream book that takes off and reaches everybody in the public, but maybe that was never its purpose. Maybe its purpose was to meet the people who hear you, resonate with you, and need something from it, and it's just like the perfect timing for them in their lives to change, as you said, the trajectory of something that's going on with them or somebody that they love.
honestly, Lori, I think you're right, because it became a number 1 bestseller on its own. It went viral, and that's, I think you hit the nail on the head. So that's been a beautiful thing to see, and to change those lives, and hope that everyone's light can get a little bit brighter in that web.
Oh, I love that. I think that that's just the best way to end this conversation. Thank you so much for not only sharing your story, because I know it does take a lot of time to do these. It's a lot of energy. People, I don't think, realize, you think you're just going to have this conversation. It is such a space of complete concentration when you're doing these. It
Yes.
actually sucks a lot of energy out of you when you
It
do these
does.
have these conversations in a good way. To me,
Yeah.
this is the most fulfilling thing I will do today. So I'm honored to have had this time and to share this space and to help you take your light and give it another platform for it to be spread out and to shine into the world. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Lori. I've enjoyed it so much. Thanks for
Me
your
too.
time.
Me too. And thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Next up, check out this playlist of other NDE interviews. Please like and subscribe. It really helps this channel to grow so I can bring you more content. Thank you for watching. I'm so glad you're here.